Welcome to the Atheist Podcast. I'm Erin.
And I'm Kelley. Atheist is where we will explore American cultural trends through the lenses of a devout theist
And a devout atheist. We will discuss the messiness of being human.
the latest in social science, psychology, and American culture.
And what any of it has to do with Homo sapiens' longtime preoccupation with religion.
Hey, Erin.
Hey, Kelley.
Welcome to our podcast.
Welcome to the Atheist and Theist Podcast.
Yeah, atheist. Dun-dun-dun.
So, for our first episode,
Yeah.
we are going to explore our backgrounds as far as how did I get to my atheist position and how you got to your theist position, with the ultimate goal of the two of us who have for a long time been able to have these rich conversations about philosophy, religion, contemporary culture,
Social science, all kinds of...
great things, and these conversations that we felt like we should maybe share with other people because they model something that we think is really needed in the 21st century, which is the ability for people from two different perspectives to have a respectful discourse and not maybe always agree, and being open to being persuaded.
Yeah. Yeah. Being persuaded and also just, I think, like, you know, I feel like when we have these kind of rich discussions, we become closer.
Yes.
Like, we're closer friends because we have these rich discussions, right? And it's not dependent on us coming to some kind of consensus.
Yeah.
Right? It's because we are able to share vulnerably, you know, the way who we are. Yeah. Which is exciting.
It is.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's the power of the Brene Brown.
Yeah.
That I think that's one of her. I mean, there's a lot of things that she says that I think are very true, but that power of vulnerability is essential, right? If you're going to have a rich relationship with anybody, you got to be able to say, I don't know, I'm kind of uncertain about this, and I'm just going to kind of put myself out there, and we're going to wrestle with this together and be okay with being in that space, and trusting that other person is going to care about you in that discomfort or uncertainty.
Yeah.
Okay, so what are we doing here? So this is going to be us exploring the intersection of American cultural trends from the lenses of a devout atheist and a devout theist. We want to discuss the messiness of being human, whether that's the latest social science, psychology, topics that are in American culture, or the long preoccupation that Homo sapien has had with religion.
Yeah.
Those are the kind of the framework of things we're going to talk about.
Yeah. Part of, I think, our interest too and our connection is that we're both storytellers. Your background in journalism and mine in theater, but you come at it from a very factual, right? Like, I want to the when, why, how, where kind of thing, and as a theater person, my storytelling kind of more through poetics, right? And I think that kind of is also gives us a different view of things too.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly one of the principles, and I know we're kind of talking about one of the questions we were going to explore in that getting to how do we get to this space, right, is what are guiding principles or things that we hold as being really important tenets to how we approach the world and life. And one of those for me is certainly Homo sapien as the storytelling animal, right? That is how we make sense of the world. That's how people really think and act, is through their understanding of stories. It is the thing that distinguishes us from any other animal on the planet, right? Is our ability to imagine things that are not real and be able to tell stories about them and spread those stories widely so that other people who are unfamiliar, they say, hey, I believe in your story too, and I want to be a part of what it is that you're doing. And, this is from Yuval Harari, who's a great Israeli historian. And he talks about that the cognitive revolution. So 70,000 years ago, that there's something that changes in the brains of Homo sapien, that they are able to defeat all the other human animals that are on the planet and take over the planet. And it's this ability to have an imagination and spread those stories widely. And the example that he uses is the economy, right? So money, we were talking about digital currency before we got on this podcast. And this is all just things we imagine, right? There's no inherent value of Bitcoin to the human animal, meaning I cannot eat Bitcoin, right? Like there's nothing about that is actually going to sustain my survival. It is the belief that Bitcoin or the US dollar or whatever form of currency is worth something, right? And it's so powerful. That story is so powerful. It's the only one that pretty much everybody in the world believes in, that I can go to the grocery store and I can take a credit card, which
or my phone.
It has no value, right? And exchange some bits into that I can't even see. And you're going to give me something in exchange that like actually keeps me alive, right? And that is not something other animals can do. Right. Some other animals can cooperate, like bees can cooperate, but they cannot cooperate flexibly and in large numbers. Like you can't convince a chimp to be like, give me all your money and someday when you're in heaven, you'll be rewarded with all the bananas. They're like, no, I'm going to keep my bananas.
I'm gonna keep my bananas.
Right? But humans, they will.
Except things are changing. With, you know, people have gotten screwed a little bit over the last, 10 years with believing in the economy and people saying that they're going to hold on to their money and invest in different things, right?
Yeah, well, and that's true because that's an American story, right? An American story is, hey, which I bought into hook, line, and sinker, right? I'm putting money into retirement accounts, and I'm not stuffing money under my mattress. But if I was, if I was in Germany, and you would say, oh, hey, the good advice is to, put your money in the stock market, and that's really what's going to secure your retirement. They'd be like, look at like what happened to my grandparents or my parents. No, that's actually not a good idea, right? So it's really those stories and that American story are really dependent on that kind of stability, and we are very much in an unstable moment.
Yeah, because people have bought into that story for so long. Yeah. Well, and in my story as a theist too, and I've told you this, that there's a woman, Rachel Held Evans, who said once, the story of Jesus is a story that I'm willing to be wrong about. The theist story it's the one I'm willing to be wrong about, And so I think sometimes that's what we do too, is we choose our stories based on, maybe what we want to be true or maybe what we see as being true. And, sometimes that's kind of enough. Yeah. So kind of we'll talk about those things too. So maybe before I have a bunch of questions I'm going to ask you, Erin.
Okay, let's do it.
But first I'm going to, when we talk about our why, I'm going to quote one of my favorites, who's Anne Lamott. Maybe one of your favorites too.
She's great. When you said that name, the first thing that I thought about was being, a very young person, and my aunt giving me one of her books, and being like, "Who is this lady?" It was like, "This lady, she's crazy. She's great.
She's crazy.
She's
and
crazy,
great
crazy
and all
good.
of it. Yeah, crazy good." So this is one of my favorite quotes of all time, and she says, "The opposite of faith." And I think when we use the word faith, we're going to use the word faith in a way that is not just religious, or is religious in terms of atheism and theism, right? That both require a faith. That the opposite of faith is not doubt, but certainty. Certainty is missing the point entirely. Faith includes noticing the mess, the emptiness, and discomfort, and letting it be there until some light returns. Faith also means reaching deeply within for the same sense one was born with. The sense, for example, to go for a walk, right? So that when we hold on to certainty, it's a violent act because we're saying nothing else can be true except this. Yeah. Right. And so we're kind of limiting all options.
Yeah.
And I think what we're coming to in our conversation is not that we're not looking for better answers to support our positions. We're looking for conversation that's going to enrich our ideas and expand them.
Yeah, that's a great quote, and it's true to the scientific method.
Yes,
like that is the heart of the scientific method. I think that sometimes people get professorial or that like scientist, right? It's like I'm not wrong, and it's the opposite. The opposite is actually what's true. The scientific method is about show me what I don't know.
Yes.
It's intentionally being open to criticism and to being open to saying like I don't know everything. We've been watching this Netflix series.
Which one?
It's hilarious. You'll dig it. It's Kunk on Earth.
What?
I think that's the right thing.
What
but
channel
it's Netflix. So it's like
Okay.
there are these 30 minutes, and she's a comedian, right? She's hilarious. She's like pretending to be this historian, and it's like totally ridiculous. But she's actually interviewing these professors who are experts, right?
Yeah.
And asking just insane questions that they're like don't know how to respond to. But the thing that my wife and I were noticing, actually I should say she noticed, is they would ask these professors these questions, and they, even though the questions were so obviously like the answer is like no, that is not true, they would be like, not that I'm aware of.
Yeah.
Every single answer was so precisely like open to the possibility that maybe this person is saying something that they do not know. And her conclusion was that's because when someone is actually an expert in something, they recognize that they don't say something just flippantly.
Yes.
They're not going to say like yes or no about something that they're like, I actually am uninformed.
Yeah.
And because they know what it means to actually be informed.
Yeah.
And I thought that was such a...
And
yeah.
what they understand now versus what could be
Yes.
is different. There was one day I woke up as I am wont to do, woke up at 3:30, 4 in the morning, and started reading Whiteheadian philosophy. So I was reading Alfred North Whitehead at 4 in the morning, and I got this quote. I was starting to read about religion, and he said, "Religion will not regain its old power until it can face change in the same spirit as does science. Its principles may be eternal, but the expression of those principles requires continual development." So I think that is also where we come at both of our positions, is that we're open to our minds being changed, and also that things are what they are until it's proved otherwise.
Yeah. And we're both people who get excited about ideas.
Yeah,
And
we're both Enneagram 7s. If there are any nerds out there, we are both enthusiasts, and so we love to be enthusiastic.
We get jazzed. We get jazzed about ideas, and we want to profess them, right?
Yes, we want to teach them.
Yeah, we want to share them widely.
Yes.
And but we're also not necessarily like so committed to the idea itself that we aren't open to being proven wrong or having our minds changed.
Yeah.
If good evidence is presented
Yep.
to say, well, this is obviously not true. Yeah.
Because we are also committed to freedom,
Yeah.
100%, right?
Yeah.
As part of who we are personality-wise.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's get into some questions.
Okay.
So we both love some Krista Tippett on being, and so I'm going to ask you the question, or I guess pose for both of us the same question she poses on her podcast, which is kind of, what is your formative growing up around your spiritual upbringing? What was that like? What was your spiritual kind of? Yeah.
So, and that's it's a good question, because, and as we're kind of going to explore, I think as time goes on, that spirituality and religion are not necessarily the same thing.
Right.
And so I think for a lot of my formative years, my understanding of spirituality was grounded in this religion upbringing, right? Which was Catholicism. So that is, although what's interesting also is that my parents were not necessarily super Catholic, right? My mom was actually never Catholic. My dad was Catholic. We moved out to the country when I was in kindergarten, and out where we lived, which is in a rural part of Missouri, the better school was the Catholic school. So that was kind of the option, right? There was the public school, and then the only private school was the Catholic school. So my parents sent us to Catholic school, and this was a place where every day of school we went to church every morning, and then followed.
Lucky you.
I know, right? And then we followed it up with going to church on the weekend as well. And so, but my parents were not necessarily dogmatic in any sense.
Yeah.
They were not people who are like, it's a mortal sin to like not go to church on a Sunday or something like that. That was not who they were at all. But they definitely did get and appreciate the sense of community that comes with, being centered around something, right? And so for that small town I was in, the school and the church were what really brought people together in a lot of ways, right? Whether it was the fish fries or the sausage suppers or the sporting, whatever it is, right? Yeah. Like that was like the thing that brought, everybody comes into town and like, that's what you go do, And so there was that communal aspect to it, which I really, appreciated. And as I kind of made my way through school as a high school student, I went to, Catholic school for high school, but it was also not really a particularly dogmatic place. Like the woman who ran like campus ministry, cool as hell, right? And so most of her projects, and I was really involved in that, even at that time when I wasn't 100% even sure, like I don't know if I believe in any of this, but what I do believe in is these projects, these service projects that we were doing. So we went to the Tetons, and there was an Indian reservation out there, and like went there for summer to build houses for people, or we would do service trips into St. Louis and go work at a food bank and interact with people. There were just so many different opportunities to be involved in spaces that were so different from where I had grown up. So like it's a farming town. And, to go into the quote unquote big city, which is, now the city that we live in, or to travel, across the country in a van with a bunch of people, like those were fantastic experiences that really exposed me to a lot of things. And so from that standpoint, I always felt like there's good here, right? Whether or not now the flip of that was really realizing that I was gay, right? And it was something I knew probably from the time I was 5 years old, right? In retrospect, I don't think I was really able to sort of name it until I was in high school. And that piece really put in tension everything else. Yes. So that, I knew like, okay, if this is something that people know about me, this community that has been formed, that is the thing that I actually think is valuable, disappears. Right? Like you don't get to be a part of that. And so there's this deep-seated fear that you're going to be found out, right? And then at the same time, so I had an uncle who unfortunately just passed away this year, and he was gay and had this very successful career. And as a young person, I knew that I looked at him and I thought he was the only person I knew that was gay in real life, right? That wasn't like a television character on Dawson's Creek. Yeah. And I thought to myself, okay, there is a space. Like there is a space someday, somewhere where this is going to be something that's okay. Yeah. And, I really credit just knowing him with having a certain level of security. I feel for the young people who are from a similar background, who maybe don't have parents that were supportive, or a family member that they could look to say, I'm trying to work out, what does this mean for my life, where they don't see any possibility. And it's really, really difficult. So I think for me that concept of religious adherence, where if you think about, I don't know, what I understood as the principles of what is Jesus trying to communicate, right? It's like about being fucking kind to people, right?
Yeah.
And so
I was gonna ask, can we say fuck on this?
Why not?
Yeah. Okay. Good.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay. We can just put the like warning or
Yeah, it's
whatever.
explicit
Okay,
warning.
Good. Okay.
So
okay.
I know, just
Okay.
breathe this out. Let's
Yeah.
say we just got to be who we are, right?
Yeah.
So, but I'm
Yes.
like, so if it's being kind to people, if the
Yes.
fact that I am gay,
Not just being kind, but being like loving and
Yeah.
inclusive and like, you know, sitting down and eating and
Yeah.
anything, you know, intimacy. Like it wasn't just
Yeah.
a passing hi, love
Yeah.
the sinner, hate the sin kind of deal.
right,
Yeah,
right,
forget
right,
that.
right.
Fuck that.
So I don't know. I'm like, okay, well, if all these people who are steeped in this religion are going to push me out of the community, basically, once that is revealed, I don't know. That doesn't jive with me, right?
Nope.
And so,
Cognitive dissonance right
yeah,
there.
yeah. And so I think that was the reality that really like put me on a path of saying, I don't really subscribe to all of this. Now I look at spirituality in a different kind of way. And I don't, you know, as far as like, what is an atheist, right? What is that? What does that mean?
Yeah.
And I think I sort of adopt a point of view that, I don't know if the right term is like a naturalist or something, but like somebody who just is sort of saying, this is the here and now, right? Like this is all that there is. And I'm not tithing for some promise of an afterlife. That I need to make the most of what it is today. Now that doesn't mean not wanting to be connected to other people. That doesn't mean not wanting to be connected to nature or recognizing, as we're going to talk about later, like how do you enter into spaces of awe? I think there are ways to be somebody who has a rich spiritual life that doesn't necessarily involve believing in some sort of higher power, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Or especially any religious institution.
Yeah.
That dictates what that higher power might be.
Might be.
Yeah. That's pretty. Yeah.
So what's your
Amazing.
what's your
What's
background?
my background?
Yeah.
Okay, so so I was raised so my grandfather was a Baptist minister, and I was raised thinking that Catholics weren't Christians, by the way. Which is laughable. So yeah, I was raised in a also a place where there was cognitive dissonance. It would not so much internal. I guess cognitive dissonance is always kind of internal. But my dad was a pastor's kid, right? So my grandfather was very conservative, teetotaling, like head of the Baptist General Conference, like big time, right? My dad was pretty rebellious of that. And so my dad was a disc jockey and then went into the music business and was like, for example, like a producer on an Ozzy Osbourne album, or promoting, Ozzy Osbourne and Cheap Trick and crazy, 70s and 80s rock and roll bands. And we moved to New York and, but there was a disconnect because there was this life that my dad had chosen in terms of music, which it doesn't have to be a disconnect. So I'm not saying that this is inherent, but he chose this one life, but then we would go to this super conservative church every Sunday. So my dad would go to Studio 54 on Saturday night and party with Grace Jones and Andy Warhol. And then Sunday morning would be in the pew, yelling at me for smelling like beer from drinking at the tennis courts the night before, right? So it was just a weird place to grow up, right? Yeah. It was just a weird kind of evangelical, super conservative strict place that was really about like, how do we keep the rules in place so that we can keep our anxiety at bay, frankly. Our feelings of chaos in the world, existential chaos, even though my parents would never, describe it that way.
Yeah.
But then I wanted nothing more than to just like graduate, leave, go to college, and like learn stuff, and get away from it. Now, that being said, like there were people in my life growing up similar to you, like in church, like that I was taught great things. I had great community. I had great people that I loved, and it was a good place in a lot of ways, right? Otherwise, I don't think I would be where I am now. But I went to go visit a college that I went to a Christian college, but there was nothing in me that wanted to go to this college. I was just like, I want to go to Chicago and like have a fun weekend with a friend. So this friend and I, we went there, and I wanted to study theater. They didn't even have a theater major. But I walked in one day to, I was there for the weekend, and they told me, you can't talk to the theater teacher. He's too busy. Okay. But I walked over to the theater one day when I was there, and people were going in for rehearsal. And I was like, oh, well, can I come watch? And I went in and watched, and they were like, yeah, sure. And it was just this like amazing community of artists working. And they were like meditating and doing all this stuff. And it was super hippy dippy. And I was like, this kind of looks cool. Like I could get into this shit, right? Yeah. Like this looks cool. This looks like a community of people that I could do art with. So I ended up going there. I actually went to the school because I wanted to study with this man. And his name was Jim Young. We called him Jimma. And he had run the program at University of Massachusetts previously, but had been there for a long time. And it was amazing. It was great. I had community. It was rich, and it was socially justice minded. Yeah. It was contemplative. There were all these things that I was introduced to in this artistic space in terms of spirituality that that I'd never been really shown when I was growing up. But then when I got out of school, again, there was this disconnect. I went home, and I was like, here are my, oddly fundamentalist parents who are also like partying with Meatloaf, like how does that work? And then then they had also thought that Wheaton had made me like a flaming, quote unquote, flaming liberal, right? So I was a flaming liberal who had come out of Wheaton College, so it was so confusing. And I was like looking at my parents and going, I don't want to think they're wrong. But then I was looking at these great professors who I had who had showed me kind of how rich their tradition and things like you had experienced, in terms of social justice had been. And I was like, I just don't know how to make these things square. And I had gone back. I'd gone to grad school, but I'm going to skip the whole grad school story. But at one point I was studying to be a teacher, and I'd gone to the library, and this was kind of my formative experience. I had grabbed this book by M. Scott Peck, which, he was a social psychologist in the 80s, wrote like The Road Less Traveled. He was like the Brene Brown of the 80s, right? And he wrote this book, and in it he has this outline for levels of spiritual development. And it was this outline, and I won't go into the whole thing right now, but it basically talked about how we enter kind of religious practice in order to flee chaos, in order to give our lives order, and that's where kind of fundamentalism is. And this is in any kind of religious idealism, right? Yeah. Any kind of religious system. But then usually, if we grow, we kind of lead into something else, which is much more like humanistic, and we realize we don't need these things. But then we kind of move into another space, which is we start looking at religious life again, but this time we're not entering religious life to flee chaos, but to embrace mystery. And that's when we kind of realize that for every piece of the puzzle that you find about, God or source or a higher power or prime mover, whatever you want to call it, every piece of the puzzle that you find, you realize the puzzle is even bigger. So it's not that you can't know God, but it's that that God is endlessly knowable, right? And so that it's about mystery. And that really resonated with me. I was 23 years old when I read this book, and I looked around and I was like, there is nothing for me to tether to in this truth. Like I didn't have anything, right? So I basically for a really long time just kind of did theater as a way of like practicing my spirituality, and I didn't really have any religious practice. And it wasn't until really, until a dear person in my life got sober, and I saw that kind of spiritual transformation, and that's when I kind of went back to really, I never like really I was never not a theist, but that's when it became really important to me.
You're like, okay, there's something here that's really important.
Yeah.
Was it a 12-step program?
Yeah.
There's a lot. I mean, the armchair Dax Shepard, right? He talks a lot about, and I don't know what his spiritual identity is necessarily.
I think he's kind of pretty much. I think he's probably an atheist.
That's what I would guess, but based on listening to his podcast. But he is often described, and that's not a program that I'm super familiar with, but the way that I've heard him describe it, it fucking works for people, and it is very. There is a lot of religious. There is a religious aspect to it that is.
For sure. Yeah, and we can that can be an episode maybe sometime.
Yeah.
Because the 12 steps is, I think, probably the most genius spiritual practice that America that has come out of American culture.
That's a profound statement.
Yeah.
What was of your? I mean, you probably know more about it than I do, having had someone close to you kind of go through it. What do you think are the most important elements of that?
Oh man, I wrote a paper on it in school. But I think it's because it's systematized, right? There's the steps are the steps of spiritual development, of kind of letting God, right? And then this process of kind of discernment and formation, what we'd call spiritual formation, which is learning and growing and kind of, and then really entering into service. So things that a lot of churches try to do and do in some ways, but I think a lot of churches miss the mark on a lot of it. And so we don't really see that kind of transformation. I mean, when you are at your wit's end.
That's what I say. When you're at the end of your rope, you're like, if this works, like, let's go. And the level of commitment is so different.
The level of commitment. You go to those meetings every day.
Yeah.
You go to those meetings every day. You get a sponsor, right? So if everybody went to church and went to, quote unquote, like church, or decided like I'm going to do a spiritual practice every single day, and I'm going to be in community with people every single day, processing that practice, and I'm going to get a spiritual director, and we'll talk about what that is at some point. But like a one-on-one kind of sponsor to kind of process my, who I am spiritually. I mean. And then I'm going to actually enact those things that I have decided are important spiritually in the world, in a horizontal frame with people, with my neighbors, and I'm going to do things. I mean, that's it.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
You don't have to be an alcoholic or a drug addict to change your life. I mean, like, it is a design for living. It's a design for spiritual development.
Yeah.
And you don't have to be an addict in any kind of way to utilize that structure and to grow into,
Who developed the structure?
Bill Wilson is his name. The Big Book and all of the framing around it is it's definitely a religious system.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's fascinating.
That is fascinating.
Yeah. Okay. So let me move to the next question. So at what point did you decide, like, so you talked about definitely like the idea that, understanding that you were gay and that this didn't fit in the system, the religious system that you were raised in. Did your view of who God was at that point, that you were taught who God was, like, God is not going to like me if I'm gay? Like, is that something that passed through your mind?
I don't know that I really thought that, because I don't know that I ever really thought that any of it was really real.
Yeah.
Like, I always sort of thought,
this is like Santa Claus.
Yeah, well, and actually, you think about that, and you think about that. I mean, I've got small kids, right? So and this is the year that
they're not going to listen to this, though.
No, and Tommy and Paul, they already know the jig is up, right? Okay, they found out that there's no Santa. But you think about that, and it's like, there is a certain level of when a kid figures out there's no Santa, you're like, oh yeah, the emperor has no clothes, right? You 100%. You start to be like, I don't know, all this seems very suspicious to me, right? So I don't know that I ever really that was what I was worried about. Yeah. Like, I wasn't as much worried about what is God gonna do. It was more like
the community.
It was more like, how is the community going to respond to, and as somebody who spent more time thinking about what does it mean to be a human being, like, it all sort of tracks, right? And this is kind of where I come at that atheist point of view, is that we're all just fucking animals, man. Like, and the idea that we're anything other than an animal. Now, if there's something that, like, I don't know, governs all animals or something, that someone can prove to me, all right, cool. But like, the idea that us specifically are something special other than any other animal, or that, like, we're sort of governed by any other than, like, the shit we've made up to be governed by, like the rules we've sort of imposed on ourselves. The ones that really govern our being are the ones that are these, like, biological. But
what do you think about storytelling? I mean, storytelling is what sets us kind of apart.
It is. Ways. And at the same time, so this morning I was listening to a podcast about octopuses. And
of course you were.
They're like the new Ezra Klein show, right? And so it's like octopuses, and then it's some version of crows. And then he's talking about AI. And it's this author, right, that is kind of written about. It's a fiction writer, but he's done he's done a lot of research on these different animal species, and but the way that, like, I actually in that kind of in the same thing that we were talking about before, was like, I think usually when I say that, like, we are the storytelling animal and then we're the only people that do this, is as far as we know. Right.
Yeah.
Like,
and he has an example. Keltner has an example in the All book about chimps.
Yeah. So, and there's the overstory, which is about how trees communicate with each other, like octopuses clearly communicate with each other. This bird species that he's talking about in the author was talking about on the podcast. He was like, once humans are toast, he's like, these birds, they're going to be driving our cars around and, like, using the internet, But it's like there's certainly the possibility, right, that some other creature could evolve to take our place someday when we have made the planet inhospitable to our presence and something else decides to spring up, until the sun burns it all up, right? Explodes and that's it. So I don't know. I mean, I think that, but for now, right? For human civilization as we know it in our lifetimes, like, we are not we're here for, like, a blink of an eye. Like, it's human beings on the life of this planet. It's like, if there's a 24-hour day, we've shown up 10 seconds before the end of the day, right? So we're not going to see the birds taken over, but somebody else might, thousands and thousands of years from now. So as far as, like, how do we explain the world and human civilization as we know it now, that's what's kind of gotten us to that place, right? That this place. But I think it's certainly within the realm of possibility that another species of animal could figure out how to communicate on the scale that we do.
Yep.
And if they could figure that out, then they could also be in control of the planet. We're just the ones that figured it out for this period of time on the planet.
Yeah. So that idea is not antithetical to my theism.
So that's fascinating. Okay.
Yeah. Because for the last 2.5 years, basically, one of my teachers is a Franciscan, Richard Rohr. I did the Living School with Richard Rohr, and
he pops up
everywhere.
Everywhere.
Yeah.
God, what was I listening to? I don't know. I was just listening to something, and I was like, oh, there he is again.
There he is again. Yeah. He's everywhere. His whole thing is too, we cannot center ourselves as human beings in the story of God, because humans have only been here a fraction of a percentage, of the time of yes, if the earth is only 10,000 years old, maybe, yes, we have a pretty, important part to play. But if we think about the history of creation, and I'm calling it creation, which is, giving away something there, but there has to be, there's more that God is just as invested in the trees and the chimpanzees and the octopi, as he is in the human beings, and that's a very Franciscan way of thinking. And it's I don't know. That just made me think of something totally different, which was this class I'm taking right now. It's called Against Development, and so Against Development.
Okay,
interesting.
Which is a provocative title, right?
Yes.
And it's intended to be so. But I think the overarching concept is, especially the American economy, certainly the American economy, and to a certain extent the global economy, right, are built on this idea of endless growth. And the course is sort of just saying, well, what happens when that's not the case anymore, right? So you look at birth rates in the United States, unless we are bringing in more immigrants, we are not going to continue to grow our population anymore. Number one, for a lot of reasons, but people are having kids older, it's super expensive, yada, yada, yada. So the number of people having 5 or 6 kids, that's just not a thing anymore, right? Unless the government fundamentally changes it's the way that it supports families, most people aren't going to have more than 1 to 3 kids is max, right? And so, when you look at countries, you look at Japan, you look at Italy, countries where that they have already kind of gone through that phase where their population, there's way more old people than there are young people. Their economies really suffer. And these are, the economies that were at certain points in time really, kings of the castle, right? They were very robust. And it's then they're really struggling with figuring out, how do we sustain this economic model when there aren't, where we don't have the numbers sort of to support it. So that's kind of what the class is about. But my where does this relate to sort of this idea of religion was the framing of the course is really to try to examine capitalism as a system, right? Which is constant growth, right? That's the model. So, okay, so if that doesn't work, what are alternatives to capitalism, and what if people thought about that, and so forth and so on? And also, how did we end up with capitalism as a system in the first place? And the theory that a lot of these scholars are putting forward is that capitalism is an outgrowth of colonialism. And so one of the some of the things that we've been reading is the manifest destiny, right? So what is it that the people who just torched their way across America, murdering all the Native Americans they could find in the meantime, they were like, well, God has chosen us to do this, right? And so I think that's the part that I also struggle with, and this is again more of a from a religious or maybe like and I don't even know I guess they were all Christians. I don't really know.
Pretty much.
So,
Yep.
but the idea is like, okay, we're gonna do all this murdering
Yeah.
in the name of the Lord, and people have been doing that. Like more people have been murdered in the name of the Lord than like any
Ever.
other
Yeah.
thing. So it's like, I don't know. It seems highly questionable, highly
Yes.
suspicious to me.
Highly suspicious. Highly suspicious. Yeah, because today a lot of Christians, in certain areas of belief, basically equate capitalism with Jesus, right?
That is fascinating.
I mean,
tell me more. Tell me more about that.
Look at like Joel Osteen. I mean, so the whole whole thing is, this prosperity gospel, that if you do what the Lord says, you will be blessed, right?
In your 401k.
In your 401k, like me and my perfectly coiffed hair and my beautifully Botoxed wife, you will be like us. And there are a lot of churches that's what they're selling. They're tight t-shirt wearing dudes selling certainty and 401ks. And that's just not Jesus. Like, and we're talking, and obviously my root tradition is in Christianity. So we're going to, we talk about, and that's where you kind of came from too. I mean, Jesus is not like an American superhero, right? Like, in fact, Jesus is like the anti-American superhero, and if people would actually follow what it was taught, I mean, it was a radical political, economic upheaval of the system. It was talking truth to power.
Yeah.
And that is not what Christianity is in America these days in dominant denominations.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think there has been for a long time a progressive element of Christianity that does move in that direction, but they just don't get, their voice is not heard.
Yeah.
And I think they're starting to speak out. But I think that's done it's done incredible damage.
Yeah.
To the PR, Jesus PR
the
team.
The brand.
The brand is fucked.
That was one of the things like that blew my mind, right? Like, so when I go to all this Catholic school. I go to Catholic school from kindergarten to, 12th grade. And never, like, then it's like as a decade later, you're like, oh, by the way, Jesus never said he was the Son of God. You're like, wait, what?
Wait, what?
Well,
and it wasn't that Jesus never said he was the Son of God, but so did Caesar, right?
Yeah.
And so did Caesar, and that's why Jesus said he was, he was claiming power that was reserved for empire.
Yeah.
And he also said, you are a child of God, and you are a child of God, and you are a child of God.
Yeah, yeah.
Right?
Yeah, yeah.
So he wasn't solely saying that he was the Son of God.
Yeah, yeah. It was Paul who was the one that was like, he's and who that, at least that's what I learned, right? It was like that Paul was the one that said, no, he really was like the Son of God, and we're gonna tell his story as if like he's the dude, right? Where it seems as though Jesus was more like, man, we gotta get people to be nicer to each other. How do we do that, right? And like and let's figure out how to make that approach. I got no beef with Jesus, like I think he was a real person who was trying to do good things in the world.
Like I think Jesus was like, can we just be nice to each other?
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. But I think that there was also a much more radical, it was much more radical than that.
Oh yeah.
Right?
And they saw him as clearly as a threat. Yeah.
Clearly. Yeah. Right. And in spite of knowing that he was going to be a threat to empire, he continued Now, when the Bible was written, when the Gospels were written, when the New Testament was written, obviously the Hebrew Bible was written at a different time, but when the New Testament is written, it was written years after Jesus, had already died, but it was written as as basically like lesson plans. Like, okay, the oral tradition is we can't kind of continue with this oral tradition. We need to document this. And so we need to write this stuff down.
Yeah, yeah.
And so that's when it was written down. And obviously, too, after Jesus' death. On scrolls and tablets and different things found in, but actually, after Jesus died, Christianity was still, people were still crucified. Afterwards, it was Constantine who adopted Christianity as the state,
the new religion. Yeah.
And of course, then it becomes power. It becomes empire. And so ever since then, it's changed and it's morphed, kind of away. So okay.
Absolute power corrupts.
Absolutely. That's a good time for a commercial. We had sponsors. Should we take a break?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. So we're back.
We're back.
And so we're just going to summarize a couple things. And, well, I don't know about summarize, but we're going to just hit a couple more things before we end this first kind of get to know you podcast.
Exploratory
adventure that this podcast is. So the first question is, today, so we talked a lot about our history and kind of how we got here. But today, what would we say are the guiding principles that kind of lead us to the decisions that we make?
Yeah. You want to go first?
Oy. I like following up. Yeah, sure. I mean, I would say for me, the guiding principles are, okay, I can be real simple and maybe a little cheesy about this, but like what are the things that push us to love better and make change in the world?
That's nice.
Yeah, I think that's kind of it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, you had asked me that question or to think about it, so I kind of jotted some things. So the first one is just to be kind to the people that I interact with and extend generosity to those people, in all the ways, right? So I mean, a generosity in literally what can I share? Whether that's, do you need a ride? Do you need, you're moving? Can I give you my car to throw shit into and take somewhere? And then a generosity of spirit, right? Which is, I'm here to be vulnerable with you. I want you to feel like you can be vulnerable with me, and that we can exchange something and feel supported in that space, right? I think that's how you develop meaningful relationships. So I try to enter that space when I can, with people. And then I guess number 2 would be small things add up to big things. Every day that we, are lucky enough to be alive on this planet, what is the one extra thing I'm doing to sort of make myself better, right? Is that learning something I didn't know before, meeting somebody and developing a meaningful interaction with that person that I didn't know before, and learning something about their life. Those things add up over time. Yeah. And it tracks with a philosophy that I really think is right, which is the Gottman, John Gottman stuff, right? And he talks about so I think this is true in our work lives, in our friendships, but certainly in our romantic relationships. And what he talks about is it's small things often, right? That is what builds trust in a relationship, and it's the small interactions that happen every single day. So he talks about bids for attention, right? Or when your significant other is like, "Hey, I think this is cool." Do you lean in and say, "Oh, I think that's cool too. Tell me more about that," or do you just kind of say, whatever, right? I'm not really paying attention. And it's the people who turn toward over time, right? that are paying attention to those bids for attention and are turning towards their partner and are doing the small things, whether that's, hey, like, you look really great today, like, you, or this dinner you made is amazing, or thank you for picking up this thing, or doing this thing for me that I couldn't take care of. That those, it's like putting a penny in a piggy bank. And then when you have a tough interaction with that significant other, oh, we're going to have a disagreement about whatever, the kid's spending too much time on video games, or whatever it is, right? That those conversations are nickel conversations, right? And if you don't have 5 pennies to in the bank, like, all of a sudden you're in debt.
Yep.
And as soon as you're in debt, your relationship is in trouble, right?
Yeah. Are you listening to this, babe? My husband's in the room.
Yeah.
I'm just making sure he's listening. Okay. He can't talk. His mic isn't on for a good reason. Sorry.
Yeah, but it's so true, you know.
Yes,
and
yes,
it's,
100%.
And it's one of those things that we just take for granted. Like, we just really do. And
especially to the people we're closest to, right?
yeah, because you just assume, like, oh, well,
I can take advantage of this person.
and it's just not true. And so that's what. So my boss, he was saying that he's been married for, I think he said 27 years, right? And he was like, people ask me, what is the secret to the success in your relationship? And he said, or, you know, how do you know you'll be married 10 years from now? And he was like, I don't. He's like, I know that I'm married today, and that I need to focus on what I can do today to make sure I'm married tomorrow. And if that is the approach, the small things often, right? Like, if that's the approach, like, you're going to be successful. So that's number 2. Number 3 is just to be straightforward. And that's kind of how I am. It's like, this is the way it is. This is the way that I think it is. You can take it or leave it, but I'm not.
Authenticity.
Yeah. And then the last guiding principle is that I remember that I will die, and that's okay.
Which is also a super, like, theistic idea too.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, we'll also post, both Erin and I have Substacks, newsletters that you can subscribe to, and we'll post the addresses for those. But your last Substack about understanding that we will die, that's, you know, memento mori. I mean, that is a spiritual practice. Yeah. That is an important, you know, that's something that we hold on to, that we share in terms of practice. Yeah. Did you have another one?
That's it. That's my list. That's at least those are the ones I came up with. I don't know.
Love people, do small things.
Yeah.
You know, remember that now is now, and you know, and we're gonna die. Yeah. I love all those things. I mean, I don't love that we're gonna die. But. Okay, and last question, and I don't mean to end on a bummer here, but, like, what are some things that concern us about the state of our world right now? And this is also going to lead into what our next episode is going to be, which is about awe and this Keltner book on the new science of everyday wonder and how it can transform your life. What are things that concern us right now, Erin? Why are we doing this?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that concerned me, or sort of what brought me into this space, and I think is something that we've been talking about for a while, is just and to me, I think it has to do with our relationship to technology and how people. My concern about technology is the way that it sort of, like, is now sort of a barrier between the way that we experience humanity. And I think it cheapens our interactions. I think it makes them more shallow and less meaningful. And there's so much less accountability and in how those interactions happen. And so where I just started to feel like, man, and I think some of this is post-Trump being elected president, but it's not. But it's not. All of it. Yeah, and it wasn't. But it's not just that, right? It's like when we start to see these moments as being like, okay, maybe that was the thing, right? But it wasn't. It's not that, right? It is. It's when you really look at it, the data. It's 2011, 2012. It's the moment that you put the iPhone in the pocket of 2011.
11.
So 2011. So the iPhone was introduced in 2009, I believe, but it was still really expensive, and only, like, you know, people who were in the industry, like, had a lot of money,
And there weren't any apps at first either.
Yeah.
It was just like a thing.
So then 2011 is the widespread adoption of the phone. And then that's sort of when you start to see that's the tipping point. Like that's where when you look at all the data sets, the charts change as far as depression, anxiety, in terms of like political discourse. Like it was already not doing super well once you introduced cable television into this ecosystem.
Right.
But then that just cranked it up a million times. Right. So I think that's been a big concern, is that there doesn't seem to be a space where people can just have a human conversation where I'm not like, no one's trying to prove anything, or you're just trying to be a human being with another human being and understand someone else. Like, I'm not here to win or score points, and that
get likes.
Yeah, or get likes. Yeah, or chasing some sort of like
dopamine fix.
Yeah,
we'll talk about that, I'm sure.
Yeah. So that's part of what I think drew me to want to do this.
Yeah. So similar for me, and first of all, just on that note, like the phone and everything, I remember, I don't know how many years ago it was, but it was a number of years ago, a bunch of us out at like a happy hour, and I remember John Ryan, our friend John Ryan, calling out to John. He held up his iPhone and he like stopped the conversation in this bar, and he was like, "This thing right here is the biggest unregulated experiment on young minds that has ever been introduced into our culture." And I dropped my jaw and I was like, holy shit, he is 100% right. And then I think it was like the next year I was like, I think Facebook is making me sad.
Yeah.
And I was like, I think I need to get off this thing.
And then they knew it and they cranked it up.
And they cranked it up. I mean, I'm not on Facebook. If you look for me, I am on Facebook, but it says I'm not here. I'm only here for the marketplace. But I am on Instagram. But I'm definitely still addicted to my phone. You're doing much better than I am on that.
It's hard. It's hard.
Super hard.
And it's hard because a lot of our jobs demand it. Yes. There are very few people that have the luxury to not be plugged in to that ecosystem.
Yeah.
And so
they've made us need it. Yeah. I mean, in so many ways, but
yeah.
So my story is similar, and I love what you said about like just not even having a place to just like be with somebody else, right?
Yeah.
So the thing that has been concerning me for the last several years, and as a teacher, I don't know how many years ago it was, but there was a huge push towards like resilient. We need to teach these kids to be gritty.
Yeah.
It was like grit. And I was like, we are teaching kids who are already so stressed out. Like, how are we going to teach them to be gritty? We're just going to say, be resilient, just like muscle through. I'm like, we are going to create a community of kids who are just, anxiety ridden and depressed, which funny enough, we have, right? That's like where we are. So this whole thing about grit, it's not that grit is bad. It's not that resilience is bad, but when we don't give people tools in order to be resilient, and you just say, grit your teeth, that's not helping anybody.
Right.
And then I was talking to my own children, and I remember saying to my son, I was like, so where are you most, at peace in your life? Like, at what moments are you most at peace? And he was like, I don't even understand the words coming out of your mouth right now. Like, this is not a thing. Like, this doesn't compute in my brain. He's like, I need to be at a low level of anxiety at all times in order to just do the things that I need to do on a daily basis. And I was like, well, that's not good. Yeah. And same with my daughter. Like, she just didn't, that just did not compute. And so at that point, I started studying mindfulness and, and I know like mindfulness is such like a catchphrase, and it's like, it's like, it's like thousands of years old and like rooted in like ancient wisdom traditions. And yet now it's
been
like
appropriated by the capitalism, the capitalistic market.
It's been appropriated, and now it's like, catchphrase mindfulness. But I'm serious. Like, I was looking for like deep wisdom on like, how do we heal and how do we live? How are we able to live in spaces that are silent? How can we like actually be with another human being and not be distracted by this goddamn brick in front of us on the table, which my brick is sitting here in front of us with questions, but like, how can we actually come back to being human again?
Yeah.
And so I started studying, and that really sent me on, a big kind of, I would say, spiritual quest, which led me to a lot of different places. But I'm still concerned, we haven't solved the problem. And kids are hungry, kids are angry, kids are hurting, and I think adults are too. And I think just the mental health of all of us is
of our collective society is
the
not
zeitgeist is not good.
And our collective attention is horrible.
Yes.
And that's maybe more than anything else, that is actually my biggest concern, is that our collective attention has been degraded, and I think will continue to degrade. And I think there are, I don't know, maybe 10% of people who actually realize that that's the case, and the rest of the 90% are just like buying shit on Instagram ads or something. Like they don't.
That's me. But yeah. But and I also think, and I've said this to you too, but like, and this goes back to our our future episode that we'll do, I'm sure, on addiction. But like, people are loving to just say, well, kids are lonely, kids are staying home, kids are on their phones, and they're just lonely. And my feeling is, no, I think kids are lonely because they're addicted to their phones, because they're addicted to technology. And one of the things that comes out of addiction is our inability to connect with other human beings.
Yeah, because we can't be alone.
And because we don't have the length of attention to be able to actually fucking listen to another human being. So I think, we bring all these specialists into schools who say, our kids are lonely. And it's like, no. Our kids actually need 12-step programs or something.
A detox from their
They need a detox. They need, they need something to, and this is me, and I'm not talking about like, let's bring prayer back in school, but I'm talking like they need something bigger than themselves that will give them a sense of otherness, that will break down that default self.
I thought it was interesting in that piece that just came out in the New York Times that when you start to disaggregate the data around who's the saddest, right, of all these kids who are depressed, it's the liberal kids, versus the conservative kids, and I wondered, it's like, why is that?
Because there's no rootedness, maybe.
Well, that's what I was wondering, right? It's like maybe this has to do with a certain sense of community that is more. I don't know, or maybe maybe it's just that people who tend to be more progressive tend to be like, things are wrong, we must change them, and people who are conservative are more like, we must keep things the same. They're so I don't know if it's just sort of like a predisposition, but I thought that was an interesting.
Well, you guys send me that article.
Yeah, I'll send it to you for sure.
Yeah. All right. On that note, I got to send you an article. That's basically what Erin and I say to each other all the time. Thank you for joining us on our first episode.
Yeah, it's been a blast.
It's been a blast.
Let's do it again next week.
Or right now as we're about to record another episode. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. Atheist is produced by Justin Seiwell and Trend Media Productions. Special thanks to Justin and all his hard work. And of course, we want to thank our listeners for joining us on this project. Be sure to subscribe to Atheist Podcast, found on Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. Please tell a friend about this episode and help us grow the show. Erin and I both have Substacks that you should check out. The links can be found in the show notes.
On our next episode, we will explore Dr. Keltner from the University of Berkeley, California, and his writing on the concept of awe. Thank you for listening, and keep looking for connection.